the argument is it actually starts changing your thinking. There is some research out there that as you start interacting with AI, the way it starts feeding and guiding the conversation actually begins to, I'm going to use a pretty strong word here, manipulate your own thinking and your own believing. And if you think about that in the context of decision making, it becomes very important.
If it gets multiplied by constant utilization of AI in writing their schoolwork, in doing their research, in asking advice to date, in planning their itinerary, and doing all of that, I am afraid that the next generation of the workforce will be very good at formulating the prompt, but incapable of being independent thinkers when the need arises.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Proc and Roll, your guide to practical procurement. Today, we continue our leadership series. If you remember our conversation last week, we talked about a number of very cool things. Extreme ownership, like you own the decision. We talked about Jeff Bezos' one-way and two-way doors. We talked a little bit about Ray Dalio and believability weighted decision making. You know, who in the conversation has the most believability and how do you do that versus just a pure democracy? We talked a little bit about Colin Powell's 40-70 rule. You need to make a decision somewhere between 40 and 70% of the information required. Too early is a problem, too late is a problem. And then we talked about the RACI model. Zach brought up accountability and responsibility, which plays in very heavily to the process. If you'll remember, and by the way, if you missed that episode, go back and listen to it. It's really good. It will set the stage for what we're going to talk about today, because right in the middle of everything that we're doing as leaders and humans, today, we now have this new player in our decision-making, which is, artificial intelligence. How many of you aren't already using artificial intelligence to guide your decision-making, guide your knowledge, open up make you more believable? Who knows? I think it's pretty much happening everywhere with everybody today. So the big question here is how should we think about and use AI in our decision-making process so that it doesn't just absolutely take everything over. I was listening to something this morning that was talking about the challenge and difficulty of like when calculators came out, when they were talking about students using calculators and whether it was okay to use calculators, and sort of the corollary that what they put on the table was, using a calculator doesn't really change your belief in mathematics. It might change your belief, your knowledge to go in and how to do some complex mathematical functions. But when you start using AI, the argument is it actually starts changing your thinking. There is some research out there that as you start interacting with AI, kind of the way it starts feeding and guiding the conversation actually begins to, I'm going to use a pretty strong word here, manipulate your own thinking and your own believing. And if you think about that in the context of decision making, it becomes very important. It's not like machines impacting our decisions is a new thing. In business school or just at leadership conferences, most of you have probably heard about examples where pilots who are responsible to make really important decisions, keep people alive and safe. There's examples where when the autopilot started giving them weird signals and weird data, they sort of lost their ability to make the right decision and protect the plane and the passengers and themselves, and they made bad decisions that ended up in the ground and all sorts of horrible things. Today's world of AI impacting our decision making in very serious ways is not completely new. There's patterns and examples of how this has happened in the past. Natasha and Zach, I'm really keen on understanding your perspective. How do you think about AI today? From a decision, and let's call research and decision making start blending together, right? Because you're starting to influence your thinking around a decision pretty early in the process of interacting with AI. have you come to a place where you're deliberately thinking about how AI is playing in here? Or are you just trusting AI? Like how do you think this works from a decision making perspective? Natasha, let's start with you and then pop over to Zach.
So for me, it's who is the master, who is the servant. So I continue to be a strong believer that I am the master and AI is a servant. Elon Musk promised that 5 years from now that will be different, that AI will become much smarter than me. Possible. I'm not arguing with that because I cannot predict how it will develop in 5 years. I suspect it may slow it down at some point, or maybe it will be moving as fast as it is now and will be developing at such a rapid and in depth. But I use AI a lot to form my decision, to form my perspective. But everything that comes out from any AI tool, I looked at it I scrutinize it. So I do not have 100% belief or certainty. So and until I'm 100% positive, it cannot replace my judgment and it cannot replace my ability to compile multiple factors. So if anything, it helps me to bring data points that I need to make a decision faster in a better articulated format, but it does not replace my my ability to make a decision. And I mean, in reality, like it helped me to plan a trip, like 3-day walking trip through Cotswold in England, and the was beautiful itinerary. It just didn't take into consideration that 3 pontoon bridges were closed. And I ended up doing 10 extra kilometers around the villages because I couldn't cross the river, right? So I think I already gave like number of instances when AI was making mistakes. So I hope that our teams will build proficiency and mastery in how to utilize various AI tools, how to make them very capable and influential servant, but that people will continue to build their muscle of critical thinking, logic, information processing, so people can continue making the right decisions.
So Zach, this like Natasha's talking about, I think an astute understanding of the shortfalls of AI, but there's this automation bias that's really real, right? A lot of people will default to AI to guide, almost everything they're doing. Like the believability of AI is so high that they're willing to turn a lot of stuff over to that. And I think, there's a bunch of examples, and I think I'm guilty of it as well, where, I find that you find the hallucination or you find where it wasn't believable. How do you think about this? I know you're super deep into working with AI and you've seen a lot of hallucinations. You're building a lot of process. Ultimately, and I don't know if it's still fair to say that AI is a big guessing and predictability machine. Still, right? It's looking at patterns, and so it's doing pattern recognition, a whole bunch of things like that. But how do you, like when you step back and you're approaching some important work where the decisions are critical, how do you start and how do you weight the AI versus your experience or other people's experience?
So I'm very interested in this question, right? Because I've been researching sort of autonomous agents and what it means to be an autonomous agent, say procurement, right? And for me, it means an agent that can run a procurement process end to end, right? With some supervision and maybe some checkpoints where a human can get involved. So, I'm bought into the idea that AI can apply judgment, can make decisions, should be trusted to do that. And for me, it's a technology question, not a capability question. So, in Natasha, your example of bridges that were closed or whatever, that's probably because of two things. Well, it's mainly one thing is the AI didn't have the context maybe around those bridge closures, right? Potentially. Now, as these firms like Anthropic and OpenAI train their models to reason better, the reasoning is improving. So, for example, if 3 years ago an agent wasn't capable of reasoning about, the route and considering whether or not a bridge on the route was open or closed, now it's better at doing the reasoning. So these reasoning capabilities improve. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is the context. So giving the AI agent the context that there are bridges here and that these bridges are subject to open and closing, etc., will allow it then to reason about it. And so for me, it becomes a question of how do you prompt an agent? How do you tell an agent, this is what you need to think about? These are the dimensions you need to consider. And then crucially, this is how you make it trustworthy, right? Crucially, how do you test it, right? How you design these evals, these tests, so that, and you run them repeatedly over and over again on the model that you're using to make sure that the AI is consistently capturing something or applying a particular kind of judgment or decision regularly. So the bridge example, I think, is a good one, right? If I was creating a travel planning agent or route planning agent, I would definitely want one of my criteria, one of my tests to be make sure this whole route is navigable. And so I would create scenarios and run that agent through all these scenarios and test those scenarios to make sure the agent is actually thinking about it right. Now, will that be 100% foolproof? No. But it can be 98% foolproof? Yes. So
I agree with you. But what I am defending is that humans will find themselves in the situations when proverbial bridge is closed, and they cannot lose their ability to think logically and be resourceful and figure out that when technology failed to give them 100% accurate information, how do they still find their way around? So I'm not suggesting that technology stands still or AI is not developing. Agree, support, I'm all for it. I just hope that we as humans will not lose our ability to process all pieces and sources of information that come our way logically and still make decisions. And you think that technology will be able to make better decisions than we do.
Technology can process context, larger context faster, So eventually if you set up the right kind of system, then yeah, you can make the case that an agent can make decisions in circumstances not necessarily better than a human would, but the same way a human would, maybe also catching things that a human might not catch. I mean, Conrad's point around the autopilot was really interesting because my understanding is planes run on autopilot most of the time anyway. They run on like autopilot and in the air, and there's all this technology helping keep things balanced. And also when you're landing, there's all this gear. So yes, you're right. The pilots might lose that muscle memory for how to manually land a plane. That's a risk you need to address 100%. But the fact is you set such a high bar for technology. I mean, self-driving cars nowadays, people are trying to make sure that they're going to be much safer than humans driving before you allow these autonomous vehicles to start going around. So I see the potential for something similar to happen. And in business, you got to remember, I don't know about, you guys, but the vast majority of enterprise, the way I see it, is not life-changing. Arguable, right? Like if you're manufacturing food and you're buying ingredients and, that kind of thing, like you want to make sure it's safe. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about that, but day to day, a lot of the business decisions don't need to be so high stakes.
So let me ask Conrad a question. So Conrad, I'm sure that when you're writing a proposal for a client, for a prospect, you utilize AI. It already knows your product very well. It understands the customer profile. You put everything what must have and so forth. does anyone from your team read it after AI creates it before you send it to prospects?
Yeah, I would say we haven't. Of course, we're using AI in the sales process. I mean, at a basic level with emails and communications and presentations to assist. But I would say in Graphite right now, we're probably, we're true to this idea that you put on the table, like who's the master, who's the servant. Like we are using AI as a tool, and the human is responsible. I mean, one of the things that you said that sparked my mind was, can you blame AI for a mistake? Like in this idea of extreme ownership, when you're accountable, can you say, well, AI messed this up? And yeah, Zach, I agree with you that a lot of times human life isn't at stake in the same way that it is at an airplane. But when you're making decisions at a leadership level that impact people, like their employment, taking care of their family, paying their mortgages, a whole bunch of things like this, you are making very material decisions about the people in your organization, and also, the viability of your company long term. I mean, the fragility of Natasha's business and my business, because they're so young, a couple of really bad decisions can absolutely just torpedo the whole thing. So, and I'm not saying that I'm not arguing wildly against what you're saying. My premise here is a little bit like Natasha's. Where does it make sense to give the decision almost it completely over to AI, and where does it not? And part of leadership and decision making, because I appreciate automating a workflow and building a tool that is making very simple procurement decisions. So I want to strip that down for a second, because I don't think those are generally leadership decisions. You're a leader, you're trying to make important decisions for the strategy of your business, your organization, whatever it might be. You're now interacting with AI to bring better decision making to that process. Like, how do we do that? So I don't know the exact answer, but I know when I listened to this podcast talking about the real shift in and influence in how I'm thinking and what I believe, because of just what the feedback mechanism that AI is putting back inside of me, it makes me wonder whether that's helping me become a better decision maker, or it's just changing me to be more aligned with what I've decided is a more believable entity.
Conrad, I don't see the lines here. These distinct. So first of all, if you're delegating decision making to AI, well, you need to design what that process looks like. The AI will execute your process for making decisions. That's the process that you're documenting, and then you're teaching the agent how to do that, and then you test that to make sure that it judges in different scenarios the same way you judge, right? So that's how I think about setting up AI for making decisions. The accountability obviously always goes back to a person, because an AI agent can't be accountable. You can't take it to court and you can't argue with it, right? At the end of the day, it's about the system that you've designed. I'm just saying that you can design these systems to run autonomously and to apply that the judgment, right, that you want to apply.
So I received a proposal from one of the providers for the services, and I replied back saying, "Thank you for the first draft. Now, can you please customize it based on what I ask you for?" And I was annoyed that I received a spit out from ChatGPT without even masking or giving an impression that the person read it. Because at the end of the day, we're still buying each other's services. And if someone is trying to sell me the service And that person who evaluates the price of their services based on their hourly rate, but he gives me a spit out that took him 30 seconds to prompt, then I feel cheated. Then I feel that I'm taken for granted because you still evaluating your services as if you're doing the work, but now you think that you outsmarted me because you didn't spend any time and you just gave me a product from from one of the AI tools. Because I think at the end of the day, at least maybe for now, this judgment and the experience that individuals possess by going to, going to colleges and then working in industries for 25, 30 years. I think that's what people willing to pay money for. And that's expertise and practical experience they're looking for. I think also the question is, in which areas of your life you want to take judgment out and in which you would like to keep it in? Do you want to take the judgment out of judge's verdict? Do you want to make, would we like to do it 100% just by the book, just by law, and take any emotional component that judge brings? Emotional component can be empathy or it can be bias.
So this is super interesting. What we said. It's number one on your example of the proposal. You said someone spent 30 minutes prompting, right? But the truth is 30 seconds, right? But the truth is, if you build a proper agent and you give it the right context and you teach it the right behaviors, that is an endeavor similar to building a piece of software, right? It's a substantial investment. And I agree with you, it's case dependent. But there are many, many things where I would prefer the speed and accuracy of, say, an agent than waiting on the line to speak to a human. And, for simple, lower stakes stuff, I'd prefer that. For something that's a bit more bespoke, where a human really, I want to see them, eye to eye, and that's something different. And that's something that that will change as well. So whereas today consultancy is provided is very much a relationship based kind of business, do I see that being disrupted by AI and agents? Yes, absolutely. Do I think the human component is going to go away completely? No, I just think it's going to evolve and look a little bit different, right, than what it looks like today. I think people will trust, advice from an AI agent if that advice was configured by someone who really knows what they're talking about and who spent the time building the agent, teaching the agent, testing the agent. There's a gap here between technology and what the capability is of technology today and the implementation. The vast majority of implementations today, the agents you're running into, they're not where the technology is capable of, right? They're still finicky and people aren't putting a lot of thought and effort. And I see a world where actually these things are going to get better and better as you give people more time. The judges thing, sorry, Conrad, I got to raise this one because this is a very interesting one. The judges thing was super interesting, Natasha. There's a famous study that always pops into my mind where they did a research on some I think it was Israeli judges. I think the research was in Israel. And what they found, I'm sure you've heard this study maybe, was that the conviction rate before lunchtime for these human judges was to a significant level higher before lunch than it was after the judges had the lunch. In other words, once the judges ate and had lunch, they were much nicer and much more empathetic and much more like understanding of whoever was holding in front of them, right? That is, by the way, a very human thing, right? So it's I'm just saying for consideration. I'm not saying AI should replace judges. I'm saying it's an interesting example to think about, right? Because an AI doesn't.
But AI is judgmental too. It's biased too, because it's trained by someone who has a bias and a judgment. Isn't like, how do you think about it, Conrad?
Well, it's interesting because Zach has such a unique perspective about this, because I think, and Zach, I don't know if this is fair, but I would say of business people that I interact with, I would say you're in the top 1 or 2% in terms of when you think about an agent, the level of training and design and building into the agent that is possible. I don't know that you do it every time, but when I talk to you and I like just as you were describing how you could build an agent to make very important strategic business decisions, and this is how you would sort of mirror and build and train and do that. I would say, 90% of all of the leaders out there and business people out there are still using AI very much like ChatGPT, where they're just like going and saying, well, hey, I need to pick between red or blue. Which one's better? And it comes back and says, well, blue is better. And this is why. And it makes it sound really good. And that person has no idea about what like the underlying patterns that and experience and whatever that kind of instructed that answer, but they just they trust it. They trust it to write the email and just send the email. They trust it to do a whole bunch of different things. And I think that sort of starts describing the challenge here. I want to kind of bridge us back to something that we talked about last time into this. Last time we talked about the gut, like how the gut is this storage of incredible pattern and experience that we all have. That gut now holds all of that, and it gives us over time, when somebody has enough experience, it brings a bunch of wisdom to that intuition that people have.
It stores emotional memories.
Well, and I'm not sure it's just emotional memories, by the way. I think emotion, I think the instinct and intuition that people have when they say, my gut said I shouldn't hire that person. Like it could be a blend of the last person that seemed like that I had bad experiences with, and maybe that is emotional. Maybe it's not. I don't know enough about it to say it's never anything other than emotion. But I think the experiences and the patterns that we have that get processed very quickly in the moment that we can't really describe are a blend of a whole bunch of things. Not unlike, I believe, how AI is like looking at all this data and all these patterns and making a very quick prediction. Don't do this, don't do that. This person, you can't be trusted, or whatever those things are. If you are now talking about a new generation of humans that essentially don't have the same kind of experience of making decisions, interacting in good and bad ways, and building that gut and that instinct from experience. Now, AI is taking that over because I'm basically delegating my intuition to the machine. Do we end up with people that can't do that? Like at a certain point, Zach, you're looking at what's coming out of the agent and you're saying, okay, I did all that work, but it still doesn't seem right. I need to put something else in there to make it seem right. Young people that don't have that experience that you do, I don't think that they can gauge that the same way that you can.
It's a new level of challenge. It's a new level of challenge that young people will come to grips with, right? The things that you and I use our intuition for today is nothing like what people used their intuition for 500 years ago, right? Like the world around you evolves. And so the things you need to be intuitive about changes. And my hope, and I have a lot of hope in young people. I think young people are going to define that next generation of what you need to be intuitive about in terms of trusting technology, for example, right? So, they're much more likely to develop that intuitiveness from a young age, working with agents all the time, being native digital, users of technology and AI. Like they're going to develop this muscle memory of like, okay, this is how agent works, what I expect. And when it doesn't behave this way, this is, they'll develop a sort of intuition for handling that technology that we won't, because frankly, we just don't have that same level of exposure. So I see it differently too, Conrad. I just think, I don't think that humans will become less intuitive. I think we'll just be intuitive about different things, right? And that's fine because the world changes. And so, yeah, there will be a different set of decisions. The types of decisions that you'll be making will be different. And so your intuition is going to be directed at those new types of decisions, which I can't predict what all of these things would be. But
if you're delegating, you end up delegating, Zach, your decision making to the agent. And I'm just going to push you here because I want you to describe it a little bit better. So if the agent can be designed to make any decisions, and can do all of this thinking. And then what's left? Like, what thinking is left for me that's not that stuff?
There's plenty of thinking. I think, like I said, I think the human's role will evolve to managing agents and managing technology, right? You're still ultimately the only thing that can be accountable as a person, right? You won't be a robot, it won't be an AI. So that's the part that evolves. Does that answer the question?
Sort of. I mean, like the pilot that sees weird signals on the machine in autopilot. I'm not talking about muscle memory of landing a plane. Like, I forget how to land a plane. Something goes haywire in the machine, and the pilot's like, well, has come to believe that the altimeter or the airspeed signals and like these things are always right. Like they're trained to believe that those things are true. And so now they start getting conflicting signals, and they have, I'm not saying everybody is a generalization, but in these cases, it seems like they've lost the ability to then, and these are really high stakes, very difficult thinking moments, right? Because I'm sure the stress is off the charts. So it's, I'm not trying to diminish this at all, but they then can't deal with the contradictory signals that they would have.
Pilot can have contradictory signals today in a plane without any AI, right? And still they're trained to deal with those situations. They're trained to handle those situations. They understand the technology in the plane. They know it's technology. They know there's no person. I think the intuitive thing is a thing that is always going to be there. I don't think AI takes that away. I think the kinds of situations in which you apply your intuition will change. And you will need to train. Yes, I'm not saying that people don't go out the equation. Like a plane being flown by an AI pilot, that doesn't mean like people don't need to be watching that plane very carefully, and also noticing when something's off, or like that side of it needs to stay, right? Maybe after a million is not that much, a billion flights, flown by AI without a single incident, right? Then maybe people will start to focus on other ways, the next level of what they need to manage, right? But that's the same as, getting in a car, or like, what I'm saying? Like the goalposts move, like the technology bolts. You need to manage that transition. Over time, you trust it more. Over time, it becomes extremely reliable. And like you and me don't question what we eat. All these companies, Monsanto and, these giant food companies, like they control the entire food supply chain. We just eat the food. We buy it from the supermarkets. We cook with it. Like, if this was 100 years ago.
And is it the best for us?
Well,
no,
I think that's this is a perfect argument, right? Because what happens in the masses is they go to the grocery store and they buy their cold cereal and they eat their crap, right? Because it becomes like the pattern is, hey, like this is life, this is how it works, and we've kind of eaten ourselves into obesity and other problems. Like people's ability to think for themselves. There's definitely examples where people stop thinking for themselves, and people generally. It's definitely a trap. And so maintaining accountability and, first principles thinking, I think is really important. I think it's more dangerous than probably than you're intending to sound, in terms of you're saying people will have the intuition. They will have these things. I think, just like there's people that still think very deeply about what they eat and how they exercise and how they take care of themselves. A lot of people don't.
I'm saying the benefits of the technology en masse for society will outweigh kind of the risks. And yes, there will be negative externalities that come about, just like how people are obese nowadays from eating all this processed junk. But that we as human beings, as a species, will rise to the challenge just like we are. Hopefully we won't fail. People are rising up now. You have Whole Foods, and, people are much more mindful about what they eat. And the new Gen Z generation are super mindful about what they eat. I say that I do think they have very high obesity rates, if I'm not mistaken. But you get my point. My point is the frontier moves, and now you're dealing with a new set of problems. Right?
Like you, I'm optimistic about humanity. I'm not trying to paint a really dark thing. I was in the car yesterday driving for 3 hours from Central Washington to Spokane, and I had a conversation with Bev on the way. I said to her, because you're on this 2-lane road, 2 cars, no separation in between. You're both going 80 miles an hour essentially towards each other, separated by 6 or 8 feet in that experience. And I said to her, won't it be amazing when it will be impossible for that driver to lose attention or to be under the influence of some substance or something and drive into your lane and kill you? Like the machine should make that impossible. There's definitely a really bright side of how this works, but I think, some of these decisions are very high data, they will come over time as the data becomes very deep and the pattern is super deeply recognized. And I'm not sure that, and I know we just have a few minutes left, so I don't want to go too deep into all of this stuff, but there is a scope of pattern and a scope of data that needs to be available for these things to work, right? And we as leaders, what I'm talking about in terms of this intuition is when you talk about a decision that you're accountable for, you need to be bringing something to the table. You can't just turn it over to the machine or forget the machine, just turn it over to your team. Like if you have a team of 10 people sitting around the table making a decision and you go for democracy and go, okay, as a group, we made this decision. You're still the leader. You're still accountable. Which it could be AI. AI could be playing a side of that. It could be people. You still need to be showing up with enough experience, enough wisdom, enough intuition to be able to decide whether, make the commitment. You're the one putting the chips on the table here. That's the right decision.
So there's a great book that I recommend everyone to read. You will enjoy it immensely. It's called Culpability. And it actually, Conrad, as you were talking about the cars moving toward each other, that's exactly what it describes. It's relationships between human and AI. Very easy read or listen. Very, very interesting. I wish for everyone to enjoy. I want to bring a different angle a little bit. Let's say Zach is right. And in 5 years, technology is much smarter than people. 3 years. Okay, it doesn't matter. Let's remove the time frame as a factor. But there's a point when the judgment and decisions made by AI across all aspects of life is much more objective, better for quality of life, impacts people in a more positive way. So what do 8.5 billion people do? Because if we left without a job, we're going to create troubles. If we left without necessity to have some structure in our life and being accountable or responsible for something, we will find a way to cause troubles and create them, because human brain is very devious that way. If it it always finds a way how to become a troublemaker. If we have nothing to apply our energy to, we're just going to kill each other.
I'm a bit more optimistic, Natasha. I don't think, by the way, just to be clear, I don't think we're going to get to a point where AI is just generally, I don't think there's one AI, is what I'm trying to say. I think the future is going to be filled with all kinds of products, all kinds of AI models that apply judgment differently, right? And so I think that plurality and diversity of AI and thinking and the way AI makes decisions, and that it's going to mirror kind of the human way today, right?
Just like how if it makes decisions in your life, then you're losing the main attribute that separates you from the elephant, monkey, dog, any other breathing thing because it's your willpower. It's your freedom of choice. That's the only thing that separates us from the animalistic world. That's our freedom of choice and our willpower. If it's which is driven by decision, take it away from you. Who are you?
So I think we decide that. So I think every person still gets to decide where they want to draw that line. I'll give you an example with this autonomous agent I've been dealing with, right? So the autonomous agent will run a procurement case. What does that mean? It means an intake comes in for procurement. They need something. Could be anything from stationery to I want to buy a new jet engine, right? Whatever, right? The agent needs to reason about it. How big is this? What's the scope? What's the complexity? Who do I need to speak to? How long is this going to take? Do we have the budget? Is it in policy? Like, it'll do all of that work. Then the agent needs to go and speak to people, right? To make sure the requirements are sound, to make sure it's got everyone's points of view, etc. Like for me, that is a big win, because that's the kind of work that, I would be doing if I was managing, let's say, a sourcing project from intake, right? Now the question becomes, what is it that I'm comfortable with the AI actually pulling the trigger on in that whole process, and where do I actually want to be involved? And it might be that I don't want to be involved right at the beginning. So that initial phase of like working out the scope and the policy checks and all this stuff, I don't want to be involved in any of that, right? Right down to drafting the email. So I want the AI to draft the emails for me. I say draft the email, not send the email. See, this is where I've drawn a line personally, because I've said, well, this is where I want to get involved. Before someone reads something that's coming out of procurement related to this case, I want to be able to review it before it goes out, right?
I respect that.
Yeah, but what I've done there, Natasha, I've basically taken a whole bunch of decisions that I don't care about, or not don't care about, but I just don't want to do, right? I want to reduce my cognitive load. And I've compressed them into moments in that process, right? Where I do want to get involved and where I do want to check the work and where I am accountable for what happens, right? So the question when we talk about AI making decisions, I think Conrad's point about leadership decisions is a good one. And that's, AI, I think, is still some ways away from being able to run a company, right? But I don't think it's beyond the possible. But take running a procurement case. There are many, many decisions when you run a procurement case. And the question becomes, well, which of those low to medium level decisions get automated away and you delegate to an AI? And then where do you get involved to make the really big calls that matter, plus also check what the AI has done?
So
right?
Zach, I've got to I want to look at both sides of this, because I see a future where, I'm an old dude and I'm not safe to drive in a traditional way anymore. And I can just get in my little, full self-drive Tesla or other car, and it will take me anywhere. So I'll be able to get transported in my own vehicle if I want until I die, even at, pretty significant, deterioration of ability to drive traditionally. That's amazing. Okay. Now let's look at what, so I really get excited about that. But if you talk about what you're saying here now, you're looking at it through the lens of an architect. Like, you are going to look at that email, but you built that whole agent. You understand the process, soup to nuts. Like, you're deeply ingrained in that. And so you now can look at that email with the context of the architect versus your commodity manager that you just handed the agent to, and they look at the email and they don't have that context. They've been out of school for 18 months. And they're now just making a grammatical, maybe not even grammar, right? Because AI has written everything for them for the last 4 or 5 years. How there's a huge difference in your ability to act in that moment than their ability to act in that moment. Architect versus beginner.
To an extent, Conrad, I would compare like architect to academy manager. Yes, let's say I built the system. I understand it really well. But let's say compare that to an experienced category manager who gets handed this agent. Would they be able to work with the agent? Yes, absolutely. They need to be able to piece together what the agent did, right? And if they don't like what the agent does, they can tell the agent, and that feedback can then be incorporated into the next cycles, etc. So the agents and AI, can adapt to your feedback and what you tell it. They can learn. So
I think
But
we're saying the same thing, Zach, honestly, because you're now going to a pseudo architect, maybe not the architect of the agent, but someone that has enough experience in the job, right? Can actually, because it's sort of human in the loop. What kind of human do you need in the loop with an agent in order to make the right decisions?
yeah, but let's take this all the way through, Conrad. Let's say we build this agent, and in the next 20 years, these procurement agents become amazing at running sourcing projects. Okay, so good that no one bothers to check them anymore, right? Like every company, you have someone sort of watching, but nothing happens really, right? It becomes a second order sort of problem, right? And then your focus as a category manager shifts more. Your decisions shift more towards new challenges that have arisen. Now, what those are, I don't know, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you can almost see how the work transforms and
Well, it's
humans
like my example. Like, I'm going to be okay delegating my driving as an old person to my car. Like, I'm going to be okay with that. So I see that treadmill, but inherent in all of this, and we're kind of almost talking about a society kind of question versus a leadership and a decision question. But they're woven together here, right? We're on a treadmill where experience in making decisions and experience in doing tasks it's like moving things off the bottom of the treadmill. And we could argue, well, that's the basic mundane. I mean, one of the podcasts I listened to last weekend was talking about robots, and it has 3 words: the dull, the dirty, and the dangerous. These are things that we want the robots to do, right? I've been trying to think of what are the 3 or 4 words that we want in knowledge working space the agent to do for us. It's probably kind of dull, absolutely. I don't know about dirty and dangerous and what the replacements are for those on the knowledge work side. But this treadmill is going to keep moving people away from the roll up your sleeves and gather the experience in order that they can, they can, I don't know, they can make the next agents. Once the architect Zach retires, this new group of people don't understand the underlying process well enough to make the next.
But that process becomes redundant. And I want to give Natasha the last word. That's why we're out of time. But my last analogy to this, and I can't think of something off the top of my head, but think of jobs that people did 100 years ago that became completely redundant because of technology, right? It's a similar kind of thing, right? AI will change things. The nature, some jobs will just not be needed anymore, not be necessary. And so you get a new set of jobs and a new set of skills that are needed to accommodate that.
Well, before it goes to Natasha, what I want to say is, as a leader, particularly in this phase, just turning over your decisions to AI or the group, like this is it's a real risk and a real problem, right? We shouldn't be doing that. Go ahead, Natasha. Bring us down the home stretch.
So we may give a wrong impression to our viewers and listeners that Zach is all for AI, Natasha is all against AI, and Conrad is kind of like in taking the best of the both worlds. I think that, like, if we characterize ourselves, is that Zach is a pro in one of very few people who very quickly in the last 2 years that we've been working together advanced very deeply in bringing AI, not just usability, but practically weaving AI into every day he does in procurement. I do it significantly less, and Conrad is studying and bringing it into his workload every day. So we are all in support. It's just to the different degree of kind of involvement and engagement and utilization. I remain a little bit on what concerns me about outsourcing decision making to AI, because I believe that if I know I don't have to make a decision, it significantly slows down my thinking function. It significantly reduces the need for my brain to fire the neurons and develop my ability for coherence, cognition, analyzing, the skill of connecting the facts and arriving to the right conclusion. And I mean, me at the tender age of 56, I'm probably not too prone to that. That will be if I get unfortunate to have some brain disease later in life. But the young generation, the high schoolers, middle schoolers, college students that are the kids of COVID, which initially kind of like or already took about 2-3 years away from their learning in the classroom, interacting with classmates, exchanging ideas with others that enrich our ability to think. And that already creates intellectual laziness. And if they take that, like their background of intellectual laziness, if it gets multiplied by constant utilization of AI in writing their schoolwork, in doing their research, in asking advice to date, in planning their itinerary, and doing all of that, I am afraid that the next generation of the workforce will be very good at formulating the prompt, but incapable of being independent thinkers when the need arises. And the need will arise at some point, and we know that. So I'm all for healthy balance to continue to stimulate humans to do what differentiates them from the animalistic world is to think, to feel, make decisions, and have the freedom of choice and practice it, and learn.
Thank you, Natasha. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. As a leader, we absolutely have this responsibility. Whatever else happens, we need to keep learning. We need to keep growing. We can't get lazy in the chair that we sit in, especially like whatever happens 50 years from now. Okay, fine. But right now we're in such a pivotal moment. It's on us to make sure that these things get designed in a way that works the best for people, works the best for ourselves, our organizations. This is really important to be mindful about how to bring AI in decision making and leadership. We're going to have another 3 of us episode about decision making, right? And I apologize for this, but what we haven't done yet here in leadership and decision making is bring our actual model to the table. Which, frankly, Zach, I want you to be thinking about if you're going to build an agent for decision making, what does that process look like? I'm going to do the same thing. Natasha, you've done this 1,000 times, over your career. So let's come back to the table with what, if we were going to go write a recipe for making good decisions, what does that recipe look like? We'll blend our models together. We'll look at some other best practice models out there as well. This will be a really good roadmap for people to think about, compare against other things that you're doing, and elevate decision-making in your leadership. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. You guys are awesome. Natasha and Zach, it's always uplifting to hear your vision and your humanity. You make me better. If I'm in the middle, it's because you guys make me better from every angle. I really appreciate you.